All right, so we're going to start directly at 12:15. So I'm very pleased to welcome everyone to today's Art for Lunch talk. My name is Emily McKibben. I'm the acting director and senior curator at the McLaren Arts Center in Barrie, and I'll be the person to help you out with any technical issues should you have any. So if something goes awry or if you need something, feel free to just pop a message into the chat box and I'll help you out. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. The local bands consist of the Chippewa Tri-Council, who are made up of Beausoleil First Nation, Georgina Island First Nation, and Rama First Nation. I would also like to acknowledge the Wendat Nation, Huron, who occupied these lands prior to the middle of the 17th century. So it's my great pleasure today to introduce Farihah Aliyah Shah, who will be speaking this afternoon. This talk was originally scheduled for March, and Farihah has been beautifully patient with us as we fumbled our way into synchronous programming this fall. So thank you, Farihah, both for speaking for today and for bearing with us these past few months. So Farihah is a contemporary artist originally from Edmonton, Alberta, now based in Bradford and Toronto, Ontario. She holds a BHRM from York University and a BFA in photography with a minor in integrated media from OCAD University. Utilizing photography, video, and sound installation, her practice explores identity formation through the colonial gaze, race, land, and collective memory. She seeks to challenge the lack of representation of disenfranchised bodies in the photographic canon and representational art, encouraging others to take agency of their image. She is a member of Gallery 44 and Women Photograph and has exhibited internationally in North America, Asia, and Europe. And in 2019, Farihah was also the 10th winner of the John Hartman Award, which is an emerging artist prize awarded annually by the McLaren with support from John Hartman. And so with that, I will turn this over to Farihah. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emily. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I hope you love the little GIF here. That's me on a regular. I have it on a mug as well next to me all the time. So I'll get started in terms of my practice. A lot of folks ask me why I have or mentioned that I've studied human resources. And it's quite tied with my ideas around psychology, dealing with people, and kind of viewing others and myself. So it's something that kind of ties really well into my practice. So I do still mention that experience. To kick things off, in terms of my practice, it started quite young. I was a ballet dancer at the age of, I think I started dancing at the age of 5, and I moved to Houston, Texas, and continued dancing. Here I am with Lauren Anderson, who was one of the first Black prima ballerinas at HBA, the Houston Ballet Academy of the Arts, and I got to dance alongside her in the Nutcracker. I was one of the clowns in that piece. She was an incredible kind of inspiration to me, and dance as a foundation has been a part of my practice. So I like to start off any artist talk that I do, kind of grounding folks in this idea of my practice and the foundation of kind of exploring creativity through the body, which is a theme that I talk often about. Part of the Complete Breakfast is a series that I created while I was a student at OCAD. Some backstory about this: I was in a few car accidents when I was a student at OCAD, 3 to be exact, over the span of 2 years. And the reason I share that narrative is it really impacted the way that I looked at photography from a physical standpoint. So I couldn't, for a really long time, I couldn't carry my own equipment, cameras, things of that nature. So a lot of ideas that I was having execution-wise was not the best thing. My photographs were looking quite poor in my second year. And I had a faculty member, a professor, who suggested that, I try another medium. That kind of speared my love for editing, sound editing, image manipulation, and emerged this piece, which is part of A Complete Breakfast. It looks at the historical content of the Rasmus and the Mimi character. The Mimi character is the one that's on the Aunt Jemima box, for example, and the Rasmus character is the one that is prevalent on, say, the Uncle Ben or the Cream of Wheat box. So I was looking at the history of these images and how loaded imagery actually is, where their content comes from, and ideas of colonialism that are kind of baked into things that we consume on an everyday basis. So the idea of consumption is also a theme that kind of comes up quite a bit in my practice and things that I enjoy exploring. So this is a 2-channel video installation. When it's shown, the works are shown at the same time. And sometimes the pieces kind of dovetail after each other. So the piece will start and then the other piece will continue, and it's in a cycle. So kind of the beginning of my career as an artist, one of the most instrumental pieces that I created was my thesis body of work. Again, while I was a student at OCAD, Prefix was created in the span of 2015 and 2016, and it explores my relationship to my identity. My family originally is from Guyana, which is in South America, and I was often asked, you know, where do you come from? Where are you really from? Those questions kind of always came to me. And I'm also a biracial person. So being Black and East Indian, having this very, I would say, complicated relationship with Guyana because I had never been. I'm originally from Edmonton, as Emily said. It was always very confusing to me that just saying that I was Canadian was not enough. So this was a piece that I started to explore a little bit more of the history of Guyana, a bit more of what it means to create a self-portrait, and a little bit more about how colonialism impacts the way we talk about ourselves and how people view us, kind of in a collective manner. The series also kind of looks at beauty standards, femininity, and the ideas of symbols within pieces. So I was really looking at kind of heavy content and how to strip all of that away and use symbolism as an opportunity or a methodology to bring out those ideas in a subtle way so that it engaged people. Oftentimes when you're talking about, you know, colonialism, racism, people are on the defense. And so I wanted it to be engaging for people to have conversation around it and then grow from there. So whatever entry point, if a lot of people would come to me and say, oh, my grandmother had these teacups. And then we would talk about like the history of fine china and why it was in, South America, Guyana being a British colony and its ties to how people move through spaces due to the consumption or the need for products and things of this nature. So I really enjoy exploring these topics, even when I was a student at York, in my history courses and whatnot. And so I thought this was a really lovely piece for me to do that and explore. And it's something that I still do within my work. So here's another image or a selection of images of that series. The piece is actually accompanied by, I believe there are 6 framed images of tea bags, and the tea bags are steeped kind of longer, and there are more tea bags. So it starts with 1 and it ends with 6. And the stain around the fabric gets darker and darker. So that was meant to talk a little bit more about colorism in the Black community. So thinking about colonialism, again, those ideas around beauty standards and someone's proximity to whiteness. So these are all ideas that I was exploring. I threw this one in here for rubber test printing. I kind of missed the darkroom. I missed the experience of printing my own work. In the early kind of parts of my practice, I was in all parts responsible for the production. And I threw this slide in here because I really do miss this part, even though I have 2 really great printers that I work with and trust very much. And they still keep me in the loop of what's the part of the practice. I do kind of miss being hands-on in this regard. I've included this slide not to highlight that I went to OCAD or that I work there now, but the CEAD still plays, it played a pretty large part in helping me as an artist. And there is, as part of the Career Development Center, there is a career launcher program. And my thesis body of work, Prefix, I submitted it to that career launcher opportunity, and I was awarded a group exhibition. So I was part of a group exhibition for that career launcher at Artscape Young Place. And then I was able to create a solo body of work. And as I kind of moved through time, I found out the CEAD was involved in a lot of different kind of elements and projects and collaborations that I was a part of. So I put up this slide to talk through a bit of those long-lasting relationships through institutions and people within those institutions who have been incredibly supportive. While I was at OCAD, I had a really good, strong group of friends and photographers. We all graduated together, and we put together a smaller show from our thesis, and it was part of Contact. And this was at New Contemporary, a gallery on Queen Street, and it was phenomenal. Nicholas, Maddie, Mara, Antonio, Benny, Abigail, Jordan, Michael, and myself. A lot of us had traveled together to Finland for another experience. We were in a collaborative project called INTAC. It's a course that you could take at OCAD where you collaborate with folks around the world. And we spent a lot of time together, most of us, and the other folks we had known just kind of throughout the program. And it was a real pleasure to get to work with those folks and collaborate with them and kind of see where their careers are going from here. We still keep in touch for the most part. This image is from an exhibition in 2019. So last year in January, it was part of an exhibition that was at Union Station. And I wanted to include this as well, because even though my thesis body of work was created in the span of 2015, 2016, it's still something that people come back to and ask for, and it's still quite relevant. So I am thankful for that. And this is another way that it's manifested. So not only does it exist in kind of its print format, but these were kind of pasted on a temporary installation. And the installation or exhibition as a whole was about the idea of transformation. It covered so many different ideas of transformation in terms of a physical sense and transformation in terms of ideologies. So talking about like political frameworks and things of that nature. So I was really happy to be part of this group exhibition. Going back now to 2016, the time after I graduated, I had an opportunity, as I mentioned, to travel a little bit. I had an exhibition in Finland, and to get to Finland, I stopped off in Iceland and created this series. For You, I Have So Many Words, which is lyrics taken from a Ben Howard song. A little note about me and naming my titles. I really do like to look towards song lyrics. It's kind of a joke between friends, and now you all know the joke. But when I was in Iceland, I was kind of at awe of the magnitude of space and the beauty that is kind of within that landscape. People are so incredibly small compared to everything else that's happening there. So in terms of my relationship with the land, I was really interested and intrigued with just documenting that space. It's one of a few series that I don't have any. There's hardly any people within the landscape, and when there are, you can see they're extremely miniature. So it was just an opportunity to reflect on how little we of a footprint we have, but at the same time how large of an impact that we have as kind of landscapes shift and change. So this is a series that I did then. Within that time period, I went from one extreme to another. So extreme cold in Iceland, and then extreme heat in Lebanon at the end of the summer. I spent about 3 weeks in Lebanon with some very good friends that I had known when I was growing up in Houston. So that's a 20+ year friendship. And I finally got an opportunity to visit her family in Lebanon. And this piece is called Sarha. In Arabic, it means magic. And for me, the magic that is there is just not about the landscape. It's about the generosity of the people, their resilience. And so I felt very welcomed, and a lot of people shared a lot of their history with me. So my friend's grandmother is well into her 90s, like late 90s. And, you know, she was telling stories about French colonialism and different things that have impacted her life. And so that kind of sharing of story and narrative was, an oral history was really important part to me in terms of understanding countries that I visit and places that I find myself in. So I created a series and I wanted to continue that series, but time and space and travel, all of these things are kind of up in the air at this point in time. So maybe in future, it's a series that I'd like to revisit and have more conversations with some folks there. Billy said strange fruit. So as I mentioned, through the CEAD, I was part of that group exhibition, and I was awarded a solo exhibition. And this was the body of work that was produced for that solo exhibition. As I mentioned, song titles, strange fruit, song title. So in that span, pretty much from 2014, I would say, until this point, 2017, and creating this body of work, the Black Lives Matter movement was really kind of picking up steam here in Toronto. And again, having some connection to the States, having lived there for 7 years, I was also very involved with the information that was being shared about police brutality and shooting of unarmed folks, specifically Black identified people. My uncle is, or was, he passed away, was a member of the Black Panthers. And when growing up in Houston, he would tell me all these stories of what it meant to be, part of that group, how it was in Houston. He's originally from Chicago, and just kind of talked about that movement and the importance of different folks within that movement. So with all of this information kind of swarming me, I put together, this was kind of my response to that. So I was looking at the history of photography and reflecting of that history, and often white history, and often a history that would rather elevate, flora and fauna over the legacy and history of, the othered. And so I wanted to kind of propose a question to the audience. What if we raised Black bodies on the same platform that we do, the same reverence that we have for flora and fauna? Would you care about what is happening to, this particular community? I grew up in a mindset where if somebody is hurt within your community, the whole community should feel that hurt. And so this was kind of a piece for me to explore those ideas. And as the piece goes on, so this is kind of the first initial images. The final image that is remaining is my gaze. So I'm looking back directly into the camera, essentially back into the audience, asking you to kind of look at yourself and how, what are you doing in regards to things that are happening? And again, this was back in 2017. Now we know that the Black Lives Matter is kind of at a pinnacle point. The movement is definitely facing a lot of challenges in terms of police brutality and things of that nature. These issues did not go away. And so now in a time of COVID, we're kind of faced and challenged with seeing what we can do as a community, as a collective unit, because this is not a Black issue, this is an us issue. So how do we move forward from here? So this is what this series reflects. That series was part of a 10 episode TV show that was put together by the folks at Madeline Co. And it was really cool. I got to work with Madeline Co. Just right after I graduated, and for the pilot, what essentially became a pilot for this series. And when the series became a full-fledged series, I was asked to be a featured artist and talk about my work and its kind of political context. One of the founders of Madeline Co., Alexandra Hong, is a good friend of mine, a colleague, and a collaborator. So again, just thinking about relationships and how organic they can be and blossom and grow. I'll kind of speak a little bit more about that relationship a little bit later, but yeah, I like to talk about this experience. It was a lot of fun to have another way of interacting with an audience. And because it was on CBC, it was broadcast to all of Canada. So access to my work became, a lot more than it was before. After that, I was a graduate. I was, no longer in school, no longer having access to studio space and equipment and all of these things. And so my practice kind of took a bit of a practical shift. I started to make work with the things that I had around me. And for me, it was, again, kind of looking outward, but still looking inward, using the equipment that I had. And so I went back to this idea of documentary and telling stories through that, and pairing images together. And in 2017, I had the opportunity to visit Guyana for the first time. As I mentioned, my family is from there. Both of my parents are Guyanese. but I had never been before. And I really struggled with the idea of calling myself, Guyanese, having never been to that space before. And when I did get an opportunity to go, it was for my mom's eldest sister. She had passed away, so we went for a funeral. So we were talking through grief, talking through the ideas of colonialism and what it means to be a part of multiple communities, or this idea of hybridity. It's another idea that kind of comes up a lot in my work. So I was exploring some of these things within this series. Here are two other images from the series. This is on the left, my Uncle Claude on the steps of my grandmother's house, which is still within the family, which is quite nice. And on the right is a coconut and a machete. So again, kind of playing with tensions, a machete being something that is both a tool potentially for violence, but also an agricultural tool, something that is used by farmers, by different folks for practical reasons. And thinking about like scars in the landscape, different things that are remaining in the landscape. I'm really intrigued by by this visual component. Earlier this year, this was in January of 2020, I had a group exhibition at Gallery 44 where I got to finally print this work. I've been sitting on it for a long time. It's manifested into books and different formats, but for the most part, it was living primarily on my computer and in digital files. So it was a really great pleasure to kind of play around with size and scale and telling this narrative with two other artists, Farihah Aliyah and Holly Chang. Their practices really speak to each other in terms of the idea of hybridity, coming from different spaces or acknowledging the memory of different spaces that potentially you have never lived in, or you have lived in, and what is it like to be identified as a Canadian who is a settler all in and of itself. So kind of exploring those different notions. And so this was still from an artist talk that we gave as part of that exhibition. Now heading back to 2018 and still traveling, I spent some time in Mexico, a very, very brief trip, and always with a camera in tow. I was, looking for a story to be told. Not really. Sometimes, sometimes I just take photographs, and it's the process afterwards that the story starts to emerge. So I find that that's a bit different from some practicing artists where they have, they'll start with an intention and then go. For me, I kind of go with the wind. So if I'm going to be in a space, I'm going to document what I see, what is interesting to me, and then afterwards draft a narrative that makes sense in terms of my own practice. And so with this particular piece, it's called Perdido en mis sueños, which is translates to Lost in My Dreams. Now, I don't speak Spanish, but I am learning, is one of my quarantine goals. And the reason why I put the title in Spanish was I started to learn Spanish at that point in time. So it was something that I was exploring. And I was riffing off the idea of when folks who are kind of foreign to a land come there, what is their relationship to that space? How do we engage? And I found a really interesting tension between this idea of preservation of and exploring kind of indigeneity within this space, and the ideas of capitalism. So in exploring those spaces, there's this kind of tension of, what is being absorbed by the person who's actually going there. And so I thought, as a metaphor, Lost in My Dreams was something that I could kind of riff off of. So yeah, this is a collection of images from that series. I've thrown in this presentation because I really love this magazine, Black Flash, and I had the opportunity to have an honorable mention in 2018 in the Optic Nerve competition. Being alongside some really heavy hitters in the photography lens space world was really incredible, and having my work recognized alongside those folks was quite an important moment for me. So I like to include this in my artist talks. And thinking about different ways of how my work manifests, I had two faculty members, Surindra and Kodama, who would constantly tell me, think about different ways that your work could exist. A photograph doesn't necessarily need to be prints on a wall or, you know, housed in a book. So in 2018, I was part of the STEPS initiative. I'm a patch artist. So what that means is, when hoarding is put up throughout the city, there is a mandate that X percentage of the spaces that are, you know, have these hoardings for development and construction buildings and whatnot, X amount of those hoardings have to be covered by art. And so this was an opportunity for me to engage with a different type of audience, have my work in a public kind of sphere and forum. And it was up for 2 years. So it was really interesting to see, you know, how weather affected these elements, how people interacted with it, whether graffiti was put on it or not. Like, it was there for the public to do what they pleased, who stood by it and looked at it and absorbed it, and who kind of just passed on by. So it's a really interesting way and different way of viewing your work than, say, in a gallery space, where you're really taking it to the people and they have full control of what they're doing. So I really liked that kind of performative element as well. Again, thinking about my ballet kind of practice and background, there are things that you control as the artist, and then there's the audience that has full range of emotion and control as well. And so that creates a really interesting narrative, and sometimes changes the narrative of what you've intended. So it's really interesting dynamic. In 2018, in October, there was an opportunity to participate with Photo Ed magazine, another magazine that I really appreciate, that talks about and really highlights Canadian-based photographers. There was an opportunity for me to give a pecha kucha, which is 20 slides in 20 seconds. So it was a fun, kind of interesting way to talk about my artistic practice. And it had been a while since I kind of stopped and thought about my practice and projecting it to a new audience. Again, it's a mixed bag of art goers and practitioners and just kind of the general public. So excuse me, I think it's important for artists to talk about their work, and kind of, it was an opportunity for me to reflect on my practice and look at kind of different themes that were emerging. Some other times that I've been able to collaborate with Photo Ed was for a digital series that they often do. So they have a print kind of magazine and then a digital series often that will add some more elements. Excuse me. And two of my images, one from Lebanon and one from Houston, that I took in a series back in 2015, I believe, was accompanied in this article about Canadians abroad. As my practice kinds of shifts and molds and changes over time, something that I'm really starting to think about is the idea of social practice. So it's really cool to be an artist and have your work in gallery settings. But for me, I think the most important part is that dialogue with people. And so there was an opportunity to do that with Koffler Gallery and Paper House Studio, to be a part of an artist panel with, I believe it was 2 other artists, and to talk through a little bit about a workshop. So there was a breakout session, and we talked about the ideas of portraiture, photography, and controlling your narrative, or having agency over your the narrative that you want to put forth in terms of your image. And so I worked with a lot of folks who are a bit younger than me. So I guess I'm no longer a youth. So I worked with youth that who had come to the talk, and we did a bit of a breakout series with Polaroids, which was a lot of fun. So still, working with a photographic medium that was off of the digital means, but still had that instant gratification of seeing that image right away. So it worked really well with that age group. And after that, there was another opportunity to do a workshop within this. It's a library in Scarborough, and there are 2 schools that are quite close by. So one is a high school, and one, I believe, is a primary school. And essentially, the library has an after-school program, and it's kind of flooded with kids from the neighborhood. And a series of artists would come through and have conversations with those folks. So it was, a planned workshop that I had to abandon the plan. the kids, I don't know if I thought I was really cool, but my PowerPoint was something that they weren't interested in seeing. So it was really funny. I sat next to somebody and I just kind of struck up conversation with them. I noticed that they had a camera, and we just started talking about photography. And then other people started to kind of trickle and gather around. And then I'm like, okay, so this is my in. This is how I'll talk about myself as an artist, what I do, and like different cameras that I use, which I did bring. So I had like medium format, different Polaroids that were on the table, and then a kind of conversation emerged organically. So the PowerPoint that I put together was quite useless, but it was okay because we were still able to engage in a different way. And this image is a medium format photograph that was created by one of the students in that workshop. Again, going back to some of my travels, in 2018, I had an opportunity to visit South Korea as part of the relationship that I built in school as a student with INTAC. It's international art collaboration. And so I still collaborate with some folks within that program. And as an alum, you can still participate. So while I was in Korea for that exhibition, I shot another series, again, looking at people's relationship to the land. In Korea, there's so many hills, so many kind of things that force people to change the way their body is in position to the land. So I thought that was really interesting. There is just off to the side here, you can see the folks are holding hands, the two kind of kids. So it was really interesting to just observe different cultures, different things that would emerge, and my relationship to those spaces, what respect looks like, what family dynamics look like, and you know, what history looks like. There are so many, there's a museum for everything in South Korea, a museum for education, a museum for war, a museum for, like I said, everything. So I called the series Continuum because I appreciated how much there was reverence for the past and still pushing forward with the future. So I kind of riffed off of that. This is another image from that series. So looking at different colors that emerged, and also, again, different formations as they kind of match the mountain range. In last year, so I had an opportunity to visit Thailand and Vietnam with a good friend of mine whose family is from Vietnam in the south. A part of that trip was to spend a little bit of time in Thailand, and this was shot on a series, an island called Koh Lipe. So it's quite small and far from some of the more popular islands. It's closer to Malaysia. And what emerged in this series was the idea of consumption. And again, I kind of talked about consumption earlier on with kind of imagery and how loaded those images are. In this regard, I was looking at kind of the dichotomy and comparison of images when they are side by side. So I was really interested in the reverence for whiteness in Asia. When I was traveling, a lot of people would stop me, whether I was in the bathroom, the airport, it really didn't matter where I was. They would stop me, ask me to touch my hair, or have their hands in my head, which was an interesting experience. Asked to take my photograph, or would be taking my photograph, you know, in a corner, would pose with me, and it made me feel very, very uncomfortable. There was an element of curiosity, and then there was also an element of me being on display, being a bit of a spectacle. And then I would see other folks' interaction with white visitors who were in those spaces. And it was a similar but different interaction. So more of a pedestal that those folks were being put on. And so there's an image here on the left. We were on the beach and folks gather around this couple. I didn't even have a conversation with them. I don't know if they're from the States or whereabouts, but people just swarmed them and asked them, you know, kept telling her how beautiful she was and all of these things. And so I was just kind of absorbing the way people gravitated to whiteness. And then looking at the products that were on the shelves in those spaces that had a lot of lightning agents and all of the television series, you know, all the actors were very fair compared to the people who were living there. So just kind of looking at this idea of, you know, trying to obtain whiteness and maintain that status, or the status that kind of comes with it. So in 7-Eleven, there's kind of massive amounts of products. And so I took some stills of took some photographs of the products, and then they are paired with these images of folks consuming. Pocky is a really popular kind of snack there. So, and a lot of different spaces. And so I kind of shot that as this mass production of idea of beauty and other ideas here. So other ways of consumption in like mass quantity in those spaces was the different forms of religion and outdoor markets. So just kind of comparing the ebb and flow of people within those spaces. Oftentimes it was very much the same high volume, lots of people kind of coming in and out. So just, again, looking at the dichotomy of these images as they're paired together. Earlier on in my career, I was really focusing on the idea of sequence from beginning to end. Like I would shoot a series and that's how I would present it. And later on in my practice, I started to play around a lot more with rearranging images to tell a bit of the story or the narrative that I'm going for. Another set of images from that series. Last year, I created a body of work that spoke to my grandmother and her history and oral history from Guyana. So taking some time and looking inward, taking some images that were shot in Guyana, shot in Montreal, where my grandmother spent the tail end of her life. This is my mom's mom. And trying to put together a portrait of her. I didn't know her, but her presence was always quite strong in my household. So I was looking for ways to connect with her. So having conversations with my mom, this is another thing that will kind of come up in my practice. We've collaborated quite a bit. And working with kind of different modalities. So photographs, scans of her passport. The piece in the middle is a thyme, it's like fine leaf thyme, which is an herb that we use in Guyana in a lot of our dishes. It's very, very strong smelling than, different types of thyme. And then my grandmother was a seamstress. So there are stitchings of the rivers of Guyana in the fabrics that are framed there. And there was also a sound installation a soundscape that was accompanying these images. And this is a traveling exhibition, a group exhibition titled Don't Ask Me Where I'm From. All of the artists are a bit of hybrids in a way. They are born somewhere, their family comes from someplace else, or they are now living in another country, speaking X amount of languages and trying to figure out what it means to be these kind of contained hybrid bodies. And it's in collaboration with the Aga Khan Museum. And so it was in Italy at first for the opening exhibition at the Aga Khan in March. The COVID had visited us, so in Canada here. So the exhibition is a bit on hold now, and hopefully it will travel again in future when things are a little bit safer. Speaking of travel, I did have the opportunity, and this was kind of a big goal of mine as earlier on in my career as an artist, or thinking about the idea of how my work would be shown. I've always wanted to be a travel documentary photographer. So it was really cool that En Route, which is Air Canada's magazine, reached out to me and asked me to put together or collaborate on a photojournalistic story covering the Great Trail, which spans from the East Coast to the West Coast here in Canada. And I got to explore the East Coast. It was my first time in that area and getting to chat with folks. And it reminded me so much of my time in Iceland and Ireland. Like the people who are there, to me, it's so funny how folks can be separated geographically, but those histories and that energy is still the same. And the landscape is very much similar. So I had a lot of time shooting that series. And this year, I did a shoot for Air Canada as well for the magazine, but due to COVID, it was from home. So I was exploring things that were around me in Bradford. I don't spend a lot of time in Bradford, or I didn't spend a lot of time in Bradford prior to my time in the city. So it was a really great way for its contributors to share what they were experiencing during the early days of COVID. So this was shot in early March and a little bit later on from there, April, I believe. So what am I up to now? I am still thinking of work. And again, proximity and travel is something that really can't be done. So I'm looking inward again. I'm looking at the history of Guyana. It's been in the news quite a bit with, oil off the shore of Venezuela and Guyana, the tensions between Venezuela and Guyana, the sudden interest in Guyana from external bodies, whether that's, land developers from China that have always had kind of a stake in Guyana, and now America trying to kind of get in on that as Exxon is making their way to this small country. So thinking about the politics of that space and the politics of food, something that I'm exploring with my friend and colleague, Alexandra Hong. Our collective is to be determined. We're still trying to determine our name, but we are working together in putting together a narrative of our relationship to food, land, and our histories. So that's going to be an interesting project, however it manifests. Right now, I guess it's in its research stage. So we'll see how that goes. And another body of work that was kind of put on hold due to COVID, I was able to finish it in a way, but it was for the Mysium Interaction Festival that was pretty much on hold this year. So hopefully it will be displayed next year for the festival. The piece is called "And With These Hands," and I've gone back to working with video, which I haven't done in a long time, and it was really nice to spend some time editing and kind of getting in the groove of listening to sound and kind of piecing things together. I have a visual component as well. I collaborated with my mom and my sister, and the piece is really centered around the idea of emotional labor. So thinking about her trajectory as a mother, as a daughter, as a female identified person, and the roles that she kind of has had in her life. So it's really focusing on her trajectory and how it relates to my own, the ideas of things that female identified folks often kind of spearhead and are responsible for, and especially in the times of COVID, what roles people in the household kind of took. We know that, gender is quite fluid and there's so many things that go into it, but there's still so much that's tied to that binary. So kind of exploring those elements in this conversation. I was listening, the piece uses sound from a talk by Angela Davis, and a lot of the things that Angela Davis is saying from that piece, which was taken from, I believe, the 70s, still has so much reference to what's happening in today's day and age with the Black Lives Matter movement, and the role of female identified folks within the space of revolution and resilience, and who is responsible for taking care of the things that kind of come out of that. So this is what this piece explores. Some other things that I'm part of right now is the Bipark Mentorship program, spearheaded by two artists. And it's been a really lovely opportunity to connect with other folks within the photographic community who are in different stages of their artistic careers and practices. The two artists that I'm working with are fresh graduates, and they're kind of exploring what it means to enter the world and workplace in a time of a pandemic, and just exploring and creating their own practices and seeing how it's going to shift and change from here. So right now, my mentorship style is conversational based. We just have really lovely chats, talk to each other about our works, how things are going in our lives, because for me, everything is research, from the food that I eat to the music that I listen to the news that I consume. Like everything excites me and perpetuates some ideas. And so that's the kind of mentorship relationship that I am putting out there for the folks that I'm working with. Oops. Another great opportunity that kind of came my way during this time was to collaborate and put together some images for an article that was titled "Black in the Ivory Tower" by Hadia Roderick. And this was a really cool opportunity for me. The piece was exploring the difficulties of Black folks within academia to pursue their careers. I work in academia now. I'm an artist. I'm a person of color. I'm Black. So all of the elements were resonating with me. So I was really happy when the folks at at the Walrus reached out for that collaboration. And they were quite open-ended in terms of how I put together the images. They weren't looking for cookie cutter images to accompany the article. So I played with Polaroids, I played with medium format, rearranging items, and this was kind of the how the work presented itself. And last but not least, I had a highlight in or spotlight in Air Canada, Canadian art. The piece was written by Sally Frater, and yesterday we had a conversation with Sally and Justine E. Chambers and myself around kind of the articles that were written, and so it was an interview series, kind of the political climate and the relationship between my work and Justine's work. If you're not familiar with her work, do check it out. It's quite amazing. She's got, she comes from a dance background as well. So we were kind of riffing off of that history and talking about our relationship to people, to land, and through movement. She said something really beautiful in her artist statement or her bio, and it's thinking about body as an archive. And really, after I've kind of looked at all of the work that I've produced up to this point, I really resonate with that sentiment and that statement. So I'll kind of leave it here in terms of that archive and this conversation, and then happy to hear some questions of what people have.
That was such an inspiring artist talk. I really appreciate it, Farihah.
Thank you.
We have a conversation actually from the audience that's a kind of a nice segue from what you were talking about as the body as archive. I can read it too if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Someone wrote, while showing us the images of Mexico, you mentioned that sometimes you photograph and see where the wind takes you, letting the imagery come before thinking about a specific idea or theme. I'm wondering if you can speak more about how you tie those images back into your practice afterward, and if it's important for your work as a whole to have one connecting through line. Thank you.
Thanks. Those are excellent questions. I think for me, it is important for my work to have a connecting through line, for it to make sense to live in one space. And I think as an artist, as we internalize information and process that information, that kind of happens without thinking too much about it. You know, the work that I'm producing is coming through my eyes, through my lens. So of course, there's going to be a bit of bias or a bit of thematic things that are appearing that are of interest to me, just by virtue of that process. And in terms of the first part of the question was referring to.
I think this was inspired by your discussion of some of the images you took while you were in Mexico.
Yeah. So for me, I as I said, I'll kind of reiterate a little bit that it's not so much important for me to go in with a lot of research prior to. It just kind of depends on the circumstance. So in terms of my relationship with that space, having grown up in Houston, having lived with, that space is predominantly dominated by folks who are from Mexico, Houston being, you know, part of Tejas, which was originally Mexico. So there's so many kind of connections, even before I reached that space, that I was thinking about, you know, way before going there. And so after I've taken some of those images, then I start to really reflect on my own personal history, my relationship to that space, and then it kind of crafts through that lens. So that's a little bit of an explanation of how I'm doing that. So it's kind of a lie a bit to say that I'm not thinking about anything before I go, because there's already kind of things within my own body and archive and my history that are tied to these spaces. And then I'm getting the opportunity to flesh them out a little bit more. And if I go to another space that is Spanish speaking, or, you know, then I flesh it out a little bit more. My tie to South America through my family, you know, allows me to do that too. So that's kind of a little bit more about that process.
And I think we've got another question. We have a question from the audience. Of all the places you have traveled, which do you wish to revisit and create another series of work?
So many spaces. I spent a day in Morocco, and if that's probably one of the spaces that I would love to revisit. it was quite early in my artistic practice. I think it was in 2015. I spent 3 weeks in Spain, like in the south of Spain, and then I traveled to Gibraltar and then into Morocco. And it was my first time in Africa. And so I would love to go back and explore that history a little bit more, specifically in Morocco, because it's kind of at the tip of, or the top of, it's so much to unpack in terms of its colonial history. Because I was in Tangiers, and it's an international city. So the people there speak about 5 different languages: English, Spanish, French, Arabic, and Italian. Like it's kind of incredible to unpack all of that information. So thinking about colonialism, I think I kind of want to start there and then trickle my way down to other spaces. And another great space that I want to revisit is Turkey. So on my way to Lebanon, I had a layover in Turkey, but I didn't have an opportunity to leave the airport. So that's always been a space that I wanted to explore a little bit more.
You have a busy itinerary coming after COVID ends.
Yeah.
So we have another question here. Learning that your background is in dance and so much of your work explores the body and its relationship to space, have you considered developing live performance in your current artistic practice?
That was something that I explored a lot in my my early years. So on my website, there's a few stills of performance-based work. Sometimes I think about, I don't know if I'll ever kind of shift back into that framework, but when I do create things like Prefix and Strange Fruit, where I'm using my own body, the process is very dance-like. So I'm essentially performing in front of the camera, and it's just taking those shots. It's on a self-timer. And so when you kind of look at all of the images in that set, it does have this kind of dance-like flow and performative element. So I don't know, it's not off the table for me. We'll just kind of see how things progress from here.
Well, it's funny because I actually have a question for you. So maybe I'll take this opportunity to ask. When we were chatting before the talk earlier today, you mentioned that you like to call yourself a lens-based artist, but you like to do so because you're very rebellious. And of course, you incorporate performance, installation, audio, and social practice within this sort of big umbrella, which I guess is lens-based practice. Are there any kind of artists or contemporary artists or artists who have come before us that have been rebellious inspiration to you?
Okay, one of the biggest inspirations to me has been Michelle Pearson Clark. She came and gave a talk when I was in my thesis. I don't even think I was in my thesis year as yet, but it was like a digital media class, something to that effect. And Michelle came and gave a talk about her practice. And the name escapes me of the series, but essentially they are, it's a moving piece, but it's very slow and subtle. So you can kind of see people blinking, kind of slight movements, but they look like portraits. And I was so fascinated by this approach of, using digital media, but still kind of having ties to photography. And I really liked the way she's kind of breaking the mold with that. She has another piece called Kiss Teeth, which is looking at the sound of when people from the Caribbean like kiss their teeth at things, and for many different reasons. And so I really, really love the way she plays with sound, with history, with the texture of the body in different ways, and making myself as a Black person feel like a full human being, because it's a wide range of emotions that she's covering. So I think that's probably one of my tops to kind of, if you folks are not aware of Michelle's practice, it's pretty cool. Check it out.
That's a fantastic recommendation, and she is brilliant. Another question from the audience: how has collaborating with artists from around the world changed the way that you approach your art?
You know what? It was a bit daunting at first, because you have preconceived notions. You have so many biases that you're not even aware of. And so getting to work with artists from around the world help to break and keep yourself in check. And it's also really nice to see that you are part of a larger community that are facing a lot of similar issues and a lot of like tackling a lot of similar kind of thoughts and feelings. So it's both a way to keep yourself in check and to feel that you're part of something bigger than what's happening in your home.
Mm-hmm. And I know you mentioned that you're working with the BIPOC mentorship program during the sort of era of COVID. Have you been finding ways to collaborate with people during these closures, or is this more a process of turning inward and kind of revisiting the work?
Mm-hmm. So I'm not so much collaborating with the two mentees. I'm more of their sounding board. So it's pretty fresh.
Mm-hmm.
We're like 2 weeks or 2 meetings in. So still trying to figure that process out. But in terms of collaboration, yes. Alex and I, so my colleague and friend, Alexandra Hong, we work together in the Center for Emerging Artists and Designers, and she is one of the founding members of Madeline Co. And we've been talking about this idea of putting together books and doing a whole bunch of things together, from like a social practice, and then something a little bit grounded in terms of or not really grounded, but tangible. And so we're going to be doing a series of conversations around our relationship with particular dishes from our family kind of history, and talking through that a little bit. So I'm really excited about that collaboration. A lot of the other collaborations that I have kind of come out just like that, like organic. I just want to work with friends, and we just have really nice conversations that eventually turn into something. So maybe there will be more of that.
Mm-hmm. And I think in the Canadian art feature, it mentioned that you were working with your mother's cookbook. Was that your mother's cookbook in the photo that you showed us earlier?
Yes, it was. Yeah. So I don't know when my mom actually purchased that book, but I've always had it in the household ever since I was quite young. And even though my mom knows a lot of these recipes from her head, she still refers to a lot of those things. And I love that there's so many kind of notes in the margin, different family members who we've consulted with, who have different methods of making, traditional dishes from Guyana. All of those notes are kind of in there. So I've been working with my mom, recreating some of those dishes, understanding them. It kind of came out of a point of me wanting to just know how to make them. And then all these lovely kind of conversations started to happen around the history of those dishes. One of my favorite dishes to eat and to make is called metenji. And it's an indigenous kind of recipe from Guyana. So again, that space is there's so much to unpack in terms of who was eating those dishes, why it's important to the culture, what types of foods are being consumed, and then what oral histories are attached to those things. So those are some things we're exploring.
Well, that's wonderful. That sounds like a really wonderful kind of generative space to start this collaboration between you and Alexandra, and then of course your mother, which is lovely. So we're just at about the 1 hour mark. So at this point, we might say our goodbyes. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A or in the chat box. But Farihah, this was a wonderful escape, and I truly appreciate your taking time out of your day to speak to us. So. Ordinarily we would applause to show our thank you, but just know we're applauding in our homes.
Amazing.
So thank you.
Thanks so much. It's so good to see you, Emily.
Oh, and you as well. And yes, of course, we'll stay in touch. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, everyone.